Welcome back to Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. You can watch this weekly podcast on YouTube and Spotify. On today's episode, we get to hear from veterinarian Dr. Sarah Dougherty. The two of us cover a lot of ground, from bird flu in raw milk to bovine colostrum, how to interpret research, probiotics for pets, influencers, and how to keep our pets safe and healthy when it comes to bird flu and pet food. And I ask her what she's most concerned about with the incoming administration. We had a great time, and she said something more than once that elicited a COVID cough of disbelief. The two of us call back to last week's conversation with Trampus Harmon from Harmon and Son Beef. If y'all haven't gotten a chance to listen to that episode, I highly recommend it. Trampus set us up well to continue this conversation about bird flu and future conversations about raw milk. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the devastating fires in Los Angeles at this time. I'm recording this intro Tuesday, January 14th, and the winds are expected to pick up before this episode drops. Amidst the tragedy and loss of human life, homes, and sense of safety, the photos and videos of displaced pets and wildlife have also hit me hard. I feel for the folks who were away from home and unable to get back to their pets when evacuations were ordered. I will link to animal resources in the show notes. Before we get to the interview, I want to thank our fearless editor, Jen Jacobs, at the top of the episode for picking up the pieces last and this week after I got COVID for the first time. She's the best editor anyone could hope for, and I'm so grateful to work with her. I was able to take all of the lessons y'all learned in COVID recovery and apply them, though I did not swallow Lysol, gargle with apple cider vinegar, or take ivermectin, something Sarah and I chat about today. And with that, I bring you my conversation with Dr. Sarah Dougherty, the owner and medical director of Willowbrook Veterinary Hospital in the Portland, Oregon area. Sarah is a certified pet nutrition coach, and in her spare time, she plays soccer internationally and spends time with her giant Labrador, Axe. Dr. Dougherty, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited. Another ag/Oregon connection. Here we go. There's so many avenues to getting into this conversation. I think I'll just start with the raw food and raw milk and bird flu of it all, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
What comes to mind as a biggest concern with bird flu for you?
I think the biggest concern that I have is how easily influenza viruses like to mutate and how quickly just one change could make it very easly to become human-human transmissible. Mm-hmm. And the cat specifically is a really good host model for that to happen. And so it's definitely concerning.
Can you say more about the cat situation?
So I don't know the specifics, or I can't explain the specifics of the way the cat's immune system works. And that basically what cats have been a model that we've used in the past for studying disease in humans. And one of the things their immune system does, it's a little bit similar to ours when it's talking about interacting with viruses, is that it can produce the same kind of outcomes that we see. So with influenza viruses, specifically when we're talking about different strains of influenza, whether it's H5N1 or the canine flu, we're really identifying those by the surface proteins. And it's the surface protein that attaches to the host cell that allows it admission into the cell. So right now, H5N1 doesn't readily attach to human cells, but it just takes one mutation of that surface protein to make it very readily attachable to human cells.
Mm-hmm. So with wellness culture and also, just regular pet food culture, there's a lot more raw food on the market. Does that make you either more concerned, or are you more likely to see bird flu animal to animal in that? I
think raw food diets have been a huge concern in veterinary medicine for years since they initially became a thing. Okay. And the biggest concern we have for that is, just like with any other uncooked food product, meat product specifically, is the risk for salmonella and E. coli transmission through uncooked meat. But when we're talking about viruses, they also are in meats. They're in meats, eggs, milk, really any product that comes from an animal that was exposed or infected. And so in traditional kibbles or traditional diets, the cooking process kills that H5N1 virus. But in the raw foods, specifically those that are poultry based, their risk is really huge for cats to become infected with that.
I've also seen reports from like big cats, especially like wildlife sanctuaries, that they're getting bird flu and dying, which is also devastating.
It preserve in or just outside of Seattle, somewhere in Washington, had to, I think they lost 44 cats, and it was multiple different species, but all just because of their diet.
Okay. Also in California, at the like dairies, at the raw, or actually at all dairies, cats, just like regular cats, going around, with either access to birds or drinking raw milk, or getting bird flu and dying. I don't think people are taking this seriously at all. What about you?
No, I think that there's a giant just lack of basic understanding of biology and virology in general. And so we always think that, a bird flu is just in birds, but without kind of lacking that basic understanding of what an influenza virus is capable of doing. We have many, many viruses that are species specific and don't cross over to other animals. Influenza is definitely not one of those, though.
I would think after COVID, or still in COVID, because folks can hear my voice right now, that people would be interested in viruses and how they work and more cautious around them. Have conversations been any different at your clinic or in your field when it comes to viruses? I
think the general attitude of most of us in the profession are definitely an overabundance of caution that we didn't typically have. The one thing with veterinary medicine is there's always going to be a disease that we are at risk to being exposed to that goes from human to animal. That's always been a factor. And we kind of were a little bit laissez-faire about that prior to COVID. And I think it just kind of really drove home the importance of PPE, masking when you don't feel good, washing your hands extra, wearing gloves, those kinds of things that we kind of maybe got lazy about because we hadn't experienced a global pandemic.
Sure. All right. I'm going to make a hard pivot into wellness culture. There are things that I just really want to know. Something that I will see in the health and wellness influencers is this praise of bovine colostrum. So bovine, first of all, yes, cows. Is it magical? Is it any different than human colostrum? What's happening?
Colostrum is the precursor to milk that a mother produces. So we traditionally think of breast milk, and that it doesn't matter what species that is. Breast milk gives nutrition. So there's fats and proteins and carbohydrates within milk. But the first 2 or 3 days of a baby's life, it is colostrum, which is a more fat-rich, just nutrient-dense food, milk, liquid. Every mammal produces colostrum.
Okay.
And the idea behind colostrum is that they give the baby a gigantic boost of antibodies. So anything that the mother has been exposed to, it's going to pass that immunity on to the baby. That immunity isn't lifelong, though. That immunity lasts anywhere from 7 days to 3 weeks, depending on the species. And so it absorbs that through its gut. That antibody, we call it maternal antibody, helps keep the baby protected until its immune system develops adequate ability to make responses to itself. So then as the baby grows up and it's exposed to things in the environment, it starts making its own antibodies. But that can take several days to a couple of weeks, depending on which particular germ it's being exposed to and which component of the immune system needs to develop for that. So bovine colostrum, is it beneficial to people? I think any colostrum can probably give you some type of anti-inflammatory benefit, but is it a magic bullet? Not for people, just for cows.
Okay, that's my question. My theory and my interest in talking to you was that I have not heard the wellness influencers and RFK Make America Healthy Again troop like shitting on vets. And so maybe you all would be more trustworthy. And then you said, oh, no, we're not all that way. Can you tell me more about that?
I think in general, veterinarians are considered the black sheep of the medical family. We're not often considered real doctors. I think in a lot of, at least America, people don't understand the amount of schooling that's required to become a veterinarian. They think it's just a normal degree that anybody can go get. When in truth, it's actually a lot harder to get into vet school because then, like when you compare it to medical school, because there are so many less seats available every year. And then you compound that with, the debt to income ratio. It takes a very special person to want to go into that industry to begin with. So they have to be very driven. They have to be very science-minded, exactly like you would expect your human physician to be. And I think there's just a lack of education and awareness around that factor in and of itself. And so we have moved away from the James Herriot era of veterinarians are amazing and should be applauded and respected to the highest degree to you don't know what you're talking about because you don't have any training in this matter. And quite often people will go to social media influencers or even just Google to try to find, why is their dog itching or why is this? Why is that? And instead of trusting in the process of a physical examination, the diagnostics required, they just want, the social influencer told them that if they add coconut oil to their dog's food, it's going to fix all of the itching, when in turn it actually causes a multitude of other potential problems.
Yeah. I mean, I was the person that asked you about a coconut oil based toothpaste, and you were like, well, don't really. I mean, if it did, it probably wouldn't be that bad, but don't.
Yeah.
Because it was totally from somebody who had set up their dog to like perfectly brush their teeth. Yeah. And that was their recipe. And it was like, it can't be this easy. I don't know.
Yeah. I think one of the other factors too is the perception around how to read scientific papers or even just a synopsis of an article. For example, somebody sent me a TikTok this morning about greenies because greenies have been linked to the deaths of 13 dogs and cats.
Oh, no.
13 sounds like a very large number when you think of your own dog. Like, what if your dog times 13 died because of a greenie?
Yeah.
That seems huge. But then when you realize that billions and billions of pets eat greenies every single day, that number becomes less scientifically, mathematically significant. And so while we want to avoid every death we possibly can, 13 out of a few billion is a very small number. And so the same thing when we're talking about things like COVID. It's really about the percentages of the population and what percentages of those populations were affected.
That's great. Can you tell folks what greenies are in case they don't have?
Greenies are specifically formulated and shaped dental chews. So they are ideally supposed to scrape more of the tartar off the teeth as the dog is chewing on them by way of their shape and design. And so mechanically, when you think about scraping tartar, it sounds like a really good idea, but they can splinter. And because they're harder, those splinters don't dissolve very quickly. So sometimes it can cause trauma to the GI tract. And I haven't personally seen, but there have been cases where the splinters of the greenie will penetrate the GI tract and cause peritonitis or whatnot.
I wasn't thinking
13 times total,
right?
To be clear.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. I had heard that. What other TikToks or Instagram reels have you seen?
I tend to do a really quick scroll right by a lot of them, so I don't necessarily see very many of them. I think they're one of the big things I see right now are they're also supposed to be dental treats, but they're shaped in a way that the dog can hold them and chew on them, which is funny. Somebody got the dog's one for Christmas, but like they don't hold it the right way. And again, it's just an enrichment chew bone, but it's not really specifically going to target the teeth. It's not meant to be a replacement for daily brushing, which we should be doing to get the optimal prevention of periodontal disease. I see the coconut oil thing a lot. I see probiotics a lot, which I really love probiotics. But the thing is that we have to understand. It takes a very specific strain of bacteria to survive through stomach acid.
Yeah.
And probiotics are active and need to live in the colon. And so when we have a probiotic that hasn't been tested to confirm that it can survive a very acidic environment and still be alive by the time it gets to the colon, then is it beneficial? And a lot of these, there's 1,001 supplements for just about everything.
Yeah.
And the probiotics are a big one that I see just lining the shelves and people, which is great. But again, you have to understand that there's no supplement that's FDA regulated. No supplement is required to do the studies to confirm that their product works. And so just picking a brand because you saw a social media influencer give it to you doesn't necessarily quantify as medical advice.
Yeah, let's apply that to humans as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think about the enzymes as well, the selling of enzymes, and like that, they're protein, like the stomach acid is supposed to break those down beforehand.
That's its job.
Right. So, dietitian side note, that's why cystic fibrosis kiddos have like gigantic pills so they will make it all the way.
All the way through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And when it comes to like animal influencers or like pet health influencers, do you find that there are veterinarians who have gone from like actually being in vet med to just making way more money on social media?
I do see a handful of them, and they're primarily going to be more of the anti-big kibble. So they're going to be promoting raw diets more than anything else.
All right.
That's what I tend to see the most of.
Big kibble. Fantastic. This is big food. Oh, the parallels. Wild.
Yeah.
Okay. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. How do you think that normalizing taking animal medications in the early pandemic opened the door to humans consuming other things meant for animals? And first, with that question, can you talk about the medications that folks were taking?
Ivermectin got a pretty good circulation on social media during the early parts of the pandemic. I believe actually came from RFK advising to take ivermectin. So ivermectin is an anti-parasiticide, meaning that it is intended for the treatment of intestinal parasites. It's used in cattle, horses, dogs, cats.
Okay.
It's actually also the primary component in several heartworm prevention medications.
Okay.
And so there have been a handful of studies. And when I say a handful of those studies, only had a handful of patients in them that had looked at some anti-parasiticides use in antivirals, anti-cancer treatments that really showed no medical reason to even continue the trials. They maybe got a little bit of positive, but there was also a lot of side effects that came with them. And so I think when we're looking at drugs for humans or animals, we have to understand that a lot of those cross over. I would say 90% of the things on my shelf in my pharmacy are also used in human medicine. And so there is a lot of crossover for that. And so reasonably speaking, a person can say a drug is a drug is a drug, and can be used for any species. But that can come with a big risk for side effects. So for example, in horses, we use xylazine as a sedative. It can actually kill you with one drop. And so it's absolutely not intended for people. There's an antibiotic that we use in dogs quite often that causes severe hallucinations in people, even though other drugs within that family cause no problems in people. And so it's just having some baseline awareness of where those drugs came from, what they're intended for, and then following your doctor's recommendations on what is appropriate for you.
Sure. And why would somebody think that an anti-parasitic drug would be an like we were working with viruses? Like what? Yeah,
to be fair, I can't even start to understand how people in research's brain works. They're on a whole different level than most of us. But every drug has a side effect. For example, we started testing, we as in the NIH started testing sildenafil for the treatment of heart disease for like a long time ago.
Okay.
And for years and years, they were like, we can't figure out how, like in theory on paper, this should work for heart disease, but why isn't it working? But also, why are all these men getting erections? And all of a sudden, Viagra was founded.
This is my COVID cough, and I love it.
So it's not unreasonable to think that an antiparasiticide could also have a benefit as an antiviral. They're all technically in the realm of antimicrobials, which is antifungals, antibacterials, antiparasiticides, and antivirals. So in theory, if it does one, maybe it could do another.
Fascinating. All right. In part 2 of that question, do you think that the ivermectin of it all opened the door to humans consuming other things meant for animals, perhaps like that bovine colostrum and other things?
I think it's reasonable to expect that if you think you can take one thing, you can take them all.
Because
any of the above.
Yeah, that's how science works, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another question is often the argument against vaccination of human babies is that animal babies don't require the same amount of vaccination. What are your thoughts on that?
The most fascinating thing for me is to try to understand how people can view the size of a creature as anything that's relevant when it comes to immune systems. Technically, the immune system is the same size as in all creatures. They all are made up of the same sets of cells, the same types of actions. You're not, while you may have a bigger blood volume, if you're 100 kilogram versus a 2 kilogram, the percentage is still the same. And so when we're looking at the volume of a vaccine, which is what people hyperfixate on, is the volume of the vaccine. The actual active components of those vaccines are very, very small. It's the diluent that spreads it out to a half a cc or 1 cc. So it's just the carrier vehicle liquid that we need to get it inside the body that makes up the volume. It's not the vaccine itself that is taking up all that space or that volume. And when you start talking, there have been cases in the past where veterinarians have unethically cut vaccines to try to make double the money on one vial of vaccine. But when you're doing that, you're not giving the body enough of the things it needs to stimulate that immune response. And so they're at risk for not mounting enough immunity and then being at risk for dying of whatever disease we're vaccinating against.
Yeah, the human to animal comparison also brings up for me the animals don't drink milk for all of their lives. They only drink it during when they're babies. Therefore, humans, shouldn't drink milk beyond, infancy or early childhood.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
That actually is how I grew up.
So
my grandpa was a board certified orthopedic surgeon for the most of his career. And then right about the time I was born, he ended up having quadruple bypass. And that was when he said, Western medicine isn't everything. What could we be doing better? And so he found a good way to kind of balance Western and Eastern medicine for the last 15 years of his career. And a lot of the things he did was look at, we're the only mammal on the planet that drinks milk our whole lives. So why are we doing that? So milk wasn't in our house. We used it if we needed it to bake or something like that, but it was not available in the refrigerator to just drink. I say this having lived 1.5 miles away from Harmon and Sons Dairy. And so but it was not part of our thing because we don't need it. We got everything we needed during the first 6 to 12 months of life. And now our body is not intended to continue getting our nutrients that way, according to some people.
What do you think the application and reality is of that?
I think that and I'm only extrapolating because I don't know specifics of human physiology and development, but the gut, the stomach and intestinal tract goes through a metamorphosis during that first 12 months. So you are readily able to absorb nutrients, and the maximum amount of the nutrients that's in milk during that time, because that's your only source of nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
And as you grow and develop and your gut microbiome changes, your ability to extrapolate nutrients from the food decreases a little bit. And then also evolves to be able to break down and absorb other nutrients. And so I would assume that same type of process happens in people that allows us to go from milk to solid food.
Mm-hmm. I am thinking as you're talking that it could likely be the same people who were previously saying, don't drink milk after you're a baby. The ones who are now saying drink raw milk because it will heal you. Like those two paths.
It quite possibly could be the same.
Right. I feel like that's the vibe that I get from both those folks. People are something. You've already mentioned RFK Jr. Fantastic. Is there anything specifically that you have concerns about the incoming administration that either can impact your job, pets?
I think it's really a public health issue in general. When veterinarians take an oath, it isn't just for the well-being of the pet, but we're actually public health servants. And so one of our main jobs is to protect the human population from diseases that could be transmitted from people or from animals to people, and also to keep our food supply safe. And so I think one of the biggest concerns I have is the propagation of misinformation and the half-truths that he tends to propagate around just health and medicine in general. And don't get me wrong, I think he has some good things. I think we do need to have some more strict guidelines around the FDA. I think we need to stop letting profitable, rich pharmaceutical companies push their studies through faster because they have more money than the next person. I think we need to take the time to do the double-blinded, placebo-controlled, randomized studies, because that's what's going to get us the most answers. As a side note, women should also be represented in those studies as they are in the population, which is absolutely not how that's happening. And so I think it boils down to people being so ready to hop on a bandwagon for a trend, and then automatically carrying that trend over to people or to their pets. And grain-free is a really good example of that, if we want to talk about that.
Yeah, I do.
Because, this whole gluten-free craze went through human health and wellness influencers. And it all boiled down to, I think they probably had a friend who had true celiac disease and saw like, oh, they're skinny and they don't have this, or this. And then they were like, oh, well, what if I go grain-free or gluten-free? And then all of a sudden, all it ends up meaning for most people is you're eating less sugar, because sugar is in most of the gluten-containing products. And then it was just like a spiral effect of misinformation as a series of comical successes that weren't really intentional.
Yeah.
And when we talk about looking at what works in a person to then what works in a dog or a cat, they're not the same. If they were the same, I could practice medicine on people, and I can't. But I think it goes back to this whole dogs are wolves, cats are cougars or tigers, and they're really not. There have been so many genetic evolutions from the true wild wolf to your Chihuahua. And along with those came several, in some cases, 20 to 30 genetic mutations through the GI tract itself that allows them to be able to absorb nutrients from plant-based proteins. And so we now have domesticated dog species that are true omnivores. They have to have plant and animal-based proteins to thrive. And people having them on a grain-free diet. And grain-free doesn't mean carnivore. There's still plants in there, but we've taken it and made it a really imbalanced diet. And so we're trying to get all of the proteins from like a pea protein or a quinoa or, something that doesn't have the same type of amino acid structures that wheat, rice, corn tends to have. And so we've caused a lot of nutritional imbalances. And the biggest thing that we see in both dogs and cats from this is they're developing heart disease. And so their hearts are becoming enlarged. And we know it's from the diet because if we take that away and give them time, the heart can recover, as long as they haven't actually developed heart failure yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so I worry about some of the same trends that continue. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I'm sure that there are plenty influencer trends that have just not quite made it all the way there yet.
Mm-hmm. The flip side, before the grain-free, I was hearing that folks were, having their cats be on vegan diets. Their dogs.
Absolutely. Yes.
What?
Yes. I have had that too, particularly if the owner is vegan or vegetarian. They will have their cat on a vegan diet. And that is interesting in and of itself. Because domesticated cats are obligate carnivores. So they do need a primarily protein-based diet, but they also have had mutations in their GI tract, and they actually also need plant-based proteins as well, just in a much different ratio than a dog does.
Mm-hmm.
And so definitely missing out on essential nutrients if they're not on high enough protein.
Wild that humans, are just like, actually, I know what's best for my animal. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bananas. Okay. Speaking of animals, I cannot have a vet on here and not talk about dogs and why they're just the best thing ever.
Why are they the best? I think it's amazing to me how empathetic they can be. So they absolutely know when you're having a bad day or where you're struggling. And you look at therapy dogs are a really good example of that, but even your own dog changes their behavior based on your needs. And they're just there all the time, every time. And they never talk back. And they just give you undying love and affection. Like, who says no to that?
I agree. I feel like a lot of men, especially who are speaking loudly and wanting attention, really just need a dog.
They really do.
That's how I feel. You want to feel heard and supported. Yes,
I got you.
Shelter. Let's do this. They really are the best. That's a good point. I hadn't actually thought about it until right now. You mentioned therapy dogs, 100%, but also the training for service dogs seems very intense. I've thought about them at times for epilepsy, but then I would have a dog with me all the time, which sounds great, but probably.
I mean, seems perfect. I don't see the problem.
What do they pick up like on the smell or just like the vibe, or
it's my understanding. So each service that they provide is going to be slightly different. Okay. It's my understanding with seizure detection is that there is a chemical change that occurs that can be detected via scent within the minute or two prior to having a seizure. And so there's also diabetes dogs now that can sense changes in blood sugar. There's another one. I mean, there's also the work that they do around anxiety and PTSD is also pretty impressive.
Yeah. I was new to like horse massage and horse acupuncture and all the things that actually made sense once. Yeah. What do you think about pet psychics, Sarah?
My jury is out.
Okay, fair. I think that's fair. What do you think about pet psychics over the phone?
Oh my Lord.
Okay, I'm not going to knock it because I totally know somebody who's done it and I love you out there. Energy is energy and vibes
did
are
it
vibes.
Work?
I would not say it worked. I would say that it provided some information that didn't lead to a conclusive anything, but I think was just very interesting for that person.
Yeah. I think, honestly, if you have a conversation with somebody that is very, very well in tuned to animal behavior, whether that's dog or cat, they can probably just give you a lot more insight on what your animal's doing that you may not necessarily be aware of.
That's a great point. That's good. Love that. No shitting on psychics.
No.
That was best. All right. Anything that you would like people to know or that you want to say about dogs before we go? Wait, also, cats are fine. Cats are good.
Cats are fine. We love cats.
Yes, cats are great. Okay. Anything that you would like to share?
No, I think just circling back to the raw diet and raw milk, I think people tend to show love to their animals by doing what they fully believe is the absolute best that they can do. But at least until we get to a point where we understand avian influenza better and or we have a vaccine or a treatment, please avoid all raw food, milk, eggs, for yourself and your pet.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. It was fun.
I will come up with excuses to bring you back.
Awesome. Maybe Trampus and I can do a duo.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Can we in person at his farm?
Maybe. Yeah.
Okay. We'll see if we can put that together.
Okay.
Thanks again to Dr. Sarah Dougherty for coming on the show. Since the interview, we've organized a visit to Harmon and Son Beef, and I hope to bring you a future farm episode or two. Next week's episode will be the first in the regrifting series, someone with only 2 degrees of separation from Oprah herself, or 1.5. I'll have to decide on the math there. Hopefully in that recording, I'll still have my sultry NPR post-COVID voice. Until next time, friends, make it awkward. This has been Making It Awkward. I'm your host, Jessica Wilson. You can buy Awkward merch at the link in the bio and on my website. You can become a Patreon member of this podcast as it works to sustain itself. You can also help out by rating, reviewing, and subscribing to the show. The show is edited and mixed by true hero Jen Jacobs. Shout out to Sacramento Outboard Services for the ongoing support and comic relief.